I'm Sahaj. I'm a software engineer at the Guild. Um, what I work at the Guild, I maintain a lot of our libraries. I maintain GraphQL CodeGen, GraphQL Yoga, Envelope. Outside of open source, I maintain our product Stellite, so I lead the product, and also occasionally help on GraphQL Hive. That's our federation platform. So today we're gonna talk about building a social media app called Y, and it's gonna use GraphQL Relay, and I'm gonna talk about React Server components and how they all come together within this whole ecosystem. So we're gonna start with what is GraphQL, then go into what Relay is, talk about benefits of Relay, then I will show you the demo app we're gonna build. I have it built out. I will share the GitHub repo with everyone here, and then so you can follow along, or you can just, I broke it down to 4 commits essentially, just to show how we can just set up Relay and do React Server components. I'm going to talk about a bit about data loader, because I think it's a concept that you don't find a lot of people talking about, so I'm going to dig into that, and then go into RSC and optimistic UIs. So what is GraphQL? GraphQL is a declarative query language used to query data from your service. So GraphQL is agnostic how you store your data. It doesn't matter to GraphQL if your data is coming from a SQL database or other microservice. And what this allows is it gives you a unified interface for your backend. So you can access any sort of service with this type-safe interface that your clients can connect to, which is very powerful. As you're scaling, you have multiple teams working, everyone's adding their own thing. You want to be able to have some sort of, some sort of unified way how you can get the data, and that is exactly what GraphQL helps you with. So who's using GraphQL? I think many of you already use GraphQL here. If you're not, maybe I can change your mind. I can help you set up GraphQL. But most of the apps, consumer-facing apps you use today, you probably use Facebook, or Instagram, Twitter. They all use GraphQL. So there's a big list of companies up there that use GraphQL. So what really cool is about GraphQL is that you get this abstraction layer on all of your backend, and you can query a lot of data. So now the question is, how do you use GraphQL in your app, right? And then that's where really Relay enters. It is the, communication layer for your front-end clients. It could be a mobile app or web app that you use to connect query data from your backend API. So if you go to relay.dev, and it will say GraphQL at scale, GraphQL client that scales. It's a pretty bold statement, and I think they prove it by using it at Facebook. All the apps at Facebook actually use Relay. So they do, they're not just a marketing site. They actually make it happen. And what really Relay is like, I think they kind of undermine just saying GraphQL client. I think it's more than a GraphQL client. To me, it's more like a JavaScript framework for your client apps. And it abstracts away how you manage state on your React apps and also just do data fetching. So it combines many different ideas. And the other good part of Relay is React teams works directly with the Relay team. So if you see suspense was added to Relay like long ago when it was a beta feature within React. So there's a lot of different things that Relay gets right out of the box, and they're tested in production. So this is the most common question I hear with our clients at the Guild is, why Relay? There's like gazillion other options for me. Why use this thing? And then I just come down to like, what makes a Relay so special, right? And then if we go into just like, I'll show you an example. So this is the app we're gonna build. You probably understand why this looks like some other app that you may have used. But if you look at this thing, right, this app that we're building, I didn't design. I'm not a designer. I just use V0 to build out most of the UI. And the goal of this app is knowledge sharing community. No question is a dumb question. You go to why and you ask your question. So when we build a React app, there's so many different moving pieces. Like, it's very simple to just build something if you're fetching one thing to show on your React app. But then as your thing grows, I don't know if I have, but like if you see on the left side, we have the nav bar, maybe there's a feature flag that adds more things to the nav bar. In the center, we have the timeline. Timeline is just post, but maybe you have ads or maybe you have different types of content. On the right side, you can see who to follow. Maybe, you add trending keywords. So like as you're building more things, it just starts to get complex. Let's focus on just this timeline component from past. And it's a very simple UI element. What you see here is like, we're showing the author name. We're showing the text on the component. We're showing who the date it was created at and how many likes it got. Very simple. If you have used GraphQL, a simple way to render this thing would be fetching, these certain fields, and you just show it. Very simple. So you can be like, hey, I can just fetch my data. Why do I need a relay, right? And then if it was just this, I would say, yeah, go use fetch in the browser. That gets you all the way. But then how do you get, the benefits start to add up when you're building more complex things. It isn't just one component. We're building we're fetching multiple posts within this view. And then within these multiple posts, there's you can see tabs. So each tab has a different type of post. And then you can have new types of posts. PMs love to add a new feature. So you gotta survive all those things. But if you have all these things happening, you simply can't rely on JavaScript to scale you out. You kind of need some sort of strong typed interface that, maybe an intern joined the team. You don't want to break the UIs. So that's where, that's where you start to see, okay, I need something that can actually, protect me before going to production. What are the checks I can have in place without having to do a suite of testing? So if we zoom out even more on my page, you see there's more things going on, right? Like you see you need a logged in state. In the middle, multiple posts. Like the complexity is just growing. And let's look at how this all would render. One way to do all this is you fetch the auth, you fetch the timeline, and then you fetch all the posts. It works. But there's a problem. If you're fetching one thing at a time, your page is just going to render really slow. You're just waiting for every single piece to come in and render it. And that's where, oh, it's playing again. But that's where GraphQL comes in. So one of the ideas is we can combine all these different components into one query, and let's fetch all that data. How may the request look like? So you can fetch all the data in one request. So rather than multiple requests going from the client, what if we just did all at once, and boom, you've saved a lot of time, which is great. You can load as fast as possible in less round trips, which is brilliant user experience. That is where really comes in. It helps you combine multiple different queries going within your app into one big query. That is super cool. But now we have a new problem to solve. This component is rendered multiple places within my app. You can be rendering in profile page, home feed, explore page, right? You name it, this thing is the premise of our app. We want people to be able to share their posts. So this is the most common thing that's gonna get rendered. So what if more people are liking? You want to maintain the state across your app. How would you render this kind of thing? We know the data is the same subset across all the pages, at least for now. So if we update one, it's we can rely on a single store saying that, hey, the data is here. If I am requesting this, it gets updated across all the places, which is cool. But now you have this new PM who wants to hide like counts on the profile page. Maybe they don't want to show you how many people are liking your stuff. Or maybe there's like some other thing you're trying where you're splitting up, your code splitting, and then you want to try out in some new file. There's a new structure that you're trying to adopt within your organization. I see people changing names from camel case to like hyphenated names. So maybe you're one of those people. So you're kind of stuck. As your product grows, you're going to have more and more things to deal with. So yeah, this is my example where, maybe on the profile page, someone was like, let's get rid of like count. Maybe on the Explorer, you're like, let's get rid of the authors. Who needs to see the author? Just get me the text. Maybe you're the person who's like, well, we need to show ads. We need to make some money now. So as you can see, like, there's 3 different things. The same component is no longer the same. The simplest approach you would take is for each different piece, you would end up building a copy of it and editing it, because that's the simplest way. And if the experiment doesn't work, all you do is delete the code. Very simple. But then the question is, there's subset of data that is same, there's subset of data that is not same. How do you mentally keep track of like, hey, now I need to go update my main query so it's like optimized one single query that we're sending to GraphQL, to your server? That's where Relay enters again. So in your components, you can define exactly the data your component needs to render. So for this example, this is your main feed rendering the postcard. And for this one, I'm saying I just want to show the text. Cool. You define the data you need as so the prop that you see, the post prop, you're defining a fragment, and fragments are really tied in together with your React component. So if you add something, remove something, you're not touching anything else. Relay actually handles everything for you. So Relay creates this big knowledge graph of how data flows throughout your app. It takes care of managing data, fetching the data, how it should look like, and all that is done statically before even going out. Like, it's done at a compile time, which is even awesome because ahead of time you can load up all this data in advance. You don't need to wait for like some runtime to actually tell you, hey, these are my queries. So you can now you can start to see actually how to optimize this thing. So let's look into how traditional data fetching works. You initiate a request, it downloads the code, it takes some time to render that, and then it fetches some data. And once the data comes back, you actually render the page, and that's where the full page is rendered for you. But with Relay, we know ahead of time all this information. We can actually save a lot more time now. So we can parallelize fetching the browser assets that you need, so all your CSS, HTML, and the query in advance. So I think, yeah, it should work now. So you're fetching both the data and the assets you want to render, and then you just render them. So you shaved a lot of time. So as your app grows, there are so many components, so many different pages. You can have multiple types, and certain parts remain the same, certain parts are new, but the idea is that when you have all these different queries going on, you need certain way to actually simplify this thing. As in, there's a lot of common stuff. So here's an example that Relay would do out of the box. So let's say you have a foo type, and then someone underneath in the component tree is asking for a foo type again and the ID. Like, this is just repeating the same information. The first operation is legal GraphQL syntax, but it's like, right now it may not be a big deal, but if you have hundreds of components doing the same thing, your server will slow down because GraphQL parsing slows down, and you may even DOS your own services. So you don't want that, and that's exactly where Relay comes in. It flattens out the queries, and so your one query can be reused across multiple components without any extra network calls. When we get the new data, it easily re-renders the new data to the components, so you don't really have to track how to, if you come from the Redux background, like how do you dispatch some action so it updates on this place, like all that kind of magic is done by the relay runtime on the client side. Check-in. So to summarize, we talked about GraphQL. What is GraphQL? What is relay? We went over the app we're gonna build. We talked about how relay has ahead of time data knowledge for your whole app. It knows how the data is gonna flow through your app, how it optimizes operations, and we looked into just comparing traditional network rendering techniques. So how do you fetch the data? How does it render the data? So if you guys want to follow along, you can scan that QR code. It takes you to a GitHub repo, hopefully, and we can then I can share my screen and we can go through the code base a little. So what you're gonna look at is, if you let me go back. If you're successfully able to clone the repo locally, and a certain thing that you would need to do is, let me know if this is good enough size for everybody. Awesome. So once you clone it, I just checked out to the initial commit I had, because there's really just 4 commits in the repo anyways. So if you check out to the first commit, that is where we're starting right now, and it kind of gives you a whole setup. So you have a Next.js app running, and if you run it, you have this thing. One thing to keep in mind, I already have database migrations. We're using SQLite locally just to make it easier for everyone. You don't need to run Postgres or anything. SQLite, I think, works for everybody. And
one little thing, if
yeah,
you install this locally right now,
yeah,
please make sure to use pnpm so a log file is used, because yesterday there was like a batch of vulnerable packages on npm,
yeah.
and make sure you don't get those on your PC. So don't use npm or yarn, use pnpm so you get save all different versions of those packages.
Good point. Yeah, so if you look at the repo, you're gonna see a very common structure that most Next.js kind of React apps have. There's the source folder, and then I split it up into different things. App is where the Next.js stuff lives in. So if you go app/API/GraphQL/route.ts, we're following a very simple approach here: a type definition and a resolver setup. I could do multiple different ways: code first, schema first. This is just me showing schema first, just because it's easier to go through a SDL file and then show everyone what's going on. So we have this simple schema that I've modeled, but if this by no means is like, this has enough things that you need, but in production there's more things you should have, and my colleague Jeff is doing a talk tomorrow about how to do good schema design, so join him to learn more about schema design. But this is my basic schema design here. So we're implementing the node interface from Relay. So what node interface does is it ensures that all your types have a globally unique identifier, which is very important in Relay, because the way Relay works, it needs to know that in your app, all these entities are globally unique. All the IDs that you're fetching are globally unique because it's a flattened data store. And we have like certain queries that you would expect. So fetching a timeline, it's a cursor paginated query. Michael from Chili Cream yesterday talked about pagination. So if you missed that, watch his YouTube video on why relative cursors are great. And yeah, back to this one. So we have a query that does timeline, and then you have certain mutations. You want to be able to create a post. Oh, even before that, you need to be able to log into the app, because we need some sort of auth. So you can log in, then you can create a post, you can like a post, you can unlike a post. Very simple. I didn't add more features, but just to show what we're gonna build, this is more than sufficient. So I'm gonna come back to why we have certain types of return types here, but going more into the server setup, we're using GraphQL Yoga. It's great. It's very simple to use, and give it a try. And it's a you just, add these things. It creates a schema. You have plugins because I'm using cookies to manage auth in my app. My security wise, it's reasonable, but I need to add some more things. So I wouldn't recommend copy pasting and deploying to production, but it's good enough for our demo. Yeah, you want to always mask your errors in production. I think it's a good thing, but I'm not doing because we're developing right now. So that's a bit about how the server is set up. If you go into the API directory, it's kind of broken up into different things. So we have the context. So context kind of injects, it does the auth thing. We're looking at the cookies coming in. It extracts the token from the cookie. It verifies if it's valid, and then it injects the authenticated user within the GraphQL context, which comes quite handy if you have multiple things going on, because you don't want to run verify multiple times. You can just verify it once, and then that a user is authenticated. We have this ID function. So I mentioned that in Relay, you want a globally unique ID throughout all your different IDs that you support. If you look at the database, everything, I did a very simple thing in my schema that everything is a simple integer ID, auto increments by 1. So my users and my post eventually end up with like a same ID number. So the way you kind of ensure that all the IDs are unique, you prefix with a type name and then an ID, and then make a base 64 cursor. This is a very common pattern within, if you're setting up a relay, that you kind of prefix these IDs. It ensures that you're consistent, globally unique and consistent throughout. And then a similar function that decodes it for me, just as a helper utility. What else we have? We have a simple rate limit function. It's all in-memory rate limits in case I DDoS myself here. And then we have all the resolvers. So I have a big resolver map, and I'm gonna close it, and I'm gonna open it a little. So what you're looking at is, in the SDL side, if I go schema.graphql, oops, this one. The structure is going to be very similar to what you see on your schemas, just so it's very, even if you don't know JavaScript or TypeScript, you can make some sense with what I'm showing right now, I hope. And yeah, so you have this logic of like, hey, I'm fetching a timeline. So what does that mean? You want authenticated users only. And then we have a very simple feed algorithm. You pull up all the followers that I have, and then all the people I'm following, we put that into a set. So we have a unique IDs, and then we just paginate through multiple different posts from all the different people that I follow. So it's a good starting point for a post feed. And then what else do we have? We have mutations. So for example, we need a sign up mutation. Anytime you sign up, we're collecting your username, password. Okay, I'm gonna show you this thing. So yeah, we have a login page, right? And then I have my test account, and then I can log in, fail to fetch because I'm not running my server. So I'm gonna start pnpm dev. It should hopefully load this thing. And then I hope I can log in. Or maybe I just broke my own demo live. Yes, I think I know what's going on. I missed my .env file. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention is like you need to create a .env file, and then you may have run into an error. I don't know why I didn't before, but so if you go to, there's a const file, it kind of declares all the different constants that you need to define. So I'm gonna do this. We can do none because we're not really deploying it anywhere right now. And then for the database URL, I'm gonna do a local.db file. And then the way you would initialize your database is SQLite 3. It kind of doing it for me. You can do local.db, and then you're saying that I have migrations in my migrations folder. And then we run this one. That creates our local DB. So I'm gonna reveal this one in Finder. data flair is cool. It's just a GUI, so I can show you that there's an actual database here. So I'm gonna drag, drop, boom, my database should load. So all the migrations were done for you. So you can see we have followers, posts, likes, users. Pretty simple database setup here. And then assuming I have everything, if I run pnpm dev again and reload, it takes a couple seconds, and well, I need to sign up now because we don't have anyone. So I'm gonna say John is my test user. I'm gonna create a password, very secret, and then I hope I can create it. It had some other issue. Let me go to my other code that I had before this one. Oh, okay. So you want to prefix your files with your local database files with file : and then mention it just so it doesn't mess up anything. And then I hope, because that's how the SQLite client expects it to be. And then if I try again, we're gonna sign up. Third time is the charm, hopefully. John. Okay, finally we logged in, and you can see a very simple UI. There's nothing going on here right now. It's very static because we just logged in, and I can't really do anything. It's not gonna actually do, because that's what we're here to build. So if I get back to the VS Code side of thing, well, I use that, but if I get back to my editor, you're gonna see there's this file called page.tsx. So that's our index file, that's our home page, and then that's exactly what is being rendered here. So if I go to homepage layout, it has certain things. It says the home, it has our feed component, it has like those side. I just put in mock data for simplicity to fill up the page, but in theory we would be actually fetching all these information, but we're just gonna focus on in the post feed. And if you look into this component, right now it's like a client component. I marked it as a client component, and what we're doing is we get, if you remember the schema, or we just go to graphical within the browser, I have this query. You can actually fetch data, but we don't have anything. But right now it's like hard coded, right? So what we ideally want is, well, let me create a post so it's actually easier for us to see what's going on. So what we would do is go here, copy cookies. You can set up auth token, and then assuming this one worked, we're gonna do mutation create, and then I'm gonna do testing, and then post. Okay, so we created a post. Now I should see my own post within the feed, and it comes in. We can pull up this. I created this so when we actually fetch the data on our client side, we can start to see what's going on. So what we have here is, you want to be able to fetch certain data on this page. And I have this postcard component already. So I did a bit of the homework already for you guys. So you see I have the postcard component. It has all the fields that it needs. So we have this fragment. So let's say if I go back, all we're doing is, well, someone's getting alerts. I am on call this week too, but I hope it's not me. So if I use the postcard, you can see it's fetching all the things that we want to show in the UI, and I kind of prepared it already. So what we need is we go back to the feed component. So it's kind of like, you're just iterating through different posts that you get back. So each one of these edges is what we're rendering. And what we want to do is we want to fetch, we want to just run this query essentially. That is exactly what we're gonna do. So I will copy paste because last time I did, I kind of broke more things. We're gonna go to home page. So in a relay, it comes with this thing called use preloaded query. So if I go relay.dev and then do use preloaded query. So it's what it is doing is you can define your GraphQL query and then you can use a query loader. It's essentially like your fetch function, and then it's gonna load all that data for you. But let me see my slides. So how we're gonna achieve this goal is I have created this help. Oh, even before I start fetching, I never told you guys how relay is set up. So let's go into the layout file. So we have this relay provider. So that's the React side of the runtime. So from React Relay, you import the relay provider and you set it up. Now you may be wondering, what does this environment mean? So if I go into the environment variable, and what this one does is it creates an environment. It tells relay how to fetch the data. Like it tells relay that, hey, this is where my server is at. So this is my HTTP endpoint. This is how I want all these preloaded queries, how much cache I want. And then you have this, fetch function essentially. And I have some, nice ways to show the errors, but in dev you can actually log the errors. And then it's the way relay works, it's abstracting away how you fetch the data from different clients. And then the environment is sort of agnostic, as in you can call the same function from on the server side and the client side. So it kind of, you have a utility function you could call on the both sides, but we can't really ship a, both sides have different constraints. So that's why we pass in the headers, because that's where like our next file comes in. So this is my, if I want to warm up the cache from my server. So if you're familiar with server side rendering, this is the function I would call. So we're calling the, network fetch from the environment, and then we're just passing in the bearer token that we had, because on the server side you can access the cookies from the request coming in and then forward those to your GraphQL server. What use serializable query does is, so you have all this data on the server side fetched, and then you stringify it. It's there, but you want to be able to load this data on the client side. So that's where this function comes in. So essentially it takes everything that your server injected to your React app, and then once the React app hydrates, it populates the relay cache store. So if I go back to my environment, there was a cache store here. Yeah, so you can see there's like response caching going on. So it kind of puts everything into that cache. It prepares everything for you. So that's a bit about the setup. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask me. Going back to our page, what we want to do is, we want to fetch data for this post component, and I'm gonna just copy paste for simplicity's sake. So we're gonna use this use preloaded query, and we're gonna replace with everything else. So I'm gonna import from React Relay, and then so the way relay would work is in another terminal, you would run a relay in watch mode, so it can watch all the different queries. As in our slides, we saw that there are multiple different components. How does relay keep track? So the compiler actually goes through your code base and it finds that, hey, these are all the queries that this person has, and then you can look into one of these files. So this one, it's like, relay optimizes it for how the client should do it. And this is the structure that the query is already optimized for you. And what you would do is you have this use preloaded query hook. I'm telling that, hey, this is the type that it's gonna fetch. So now if I look at the response type, you can see that if I hover over it, you can see exactly the fields I asked for. So I'm asking for like timeline, and then I'm asking for the edges, and then within those edges there's a node, and then I'm fetching postcards. And then those postcards are what I'm forwarding down to the post component. So now you see there's a query graph. So the way preloaded query works is it needs you to either you do a render on fetch, like on the first load, you would do a client side query to fetch this data, or you would do on the server side, fetch all this query and inject it to the React app, and then the client side actually loads it up. We're gonna do a server side, we're doing React server components here, so we're gonna actually take we're gonna go back to our parent of this one, and what that is gonna do is this is our client side piece. So here we will serialize what we get from the server. So but like before that, let's just go into the parent of this one, which actually runs on the server side. So the way you make it run on the server side is you do use server, and now you can make it an async function. And what we're gonna do is I can do load query, load serializable query, and then this is our utility function that we previously had. And then in this one, we're gonna do enhanced post feed. Enhanced, well, let me just go back here. This one. Well, the autofill isn't filling for me. I'm gonna copy paste again. So we're gonna take this and essentially copy paste it here. I hope. Okay. So now I see the generated query that we had previously on our main, on the client side of the app. So we get that same query, and then for the type safety part, I just tell it that, hey, this is the structure of this. So it kind of helps you with the types. And then if you recall, go here, we have this, first, we're giving it a variable to tell it how many posts to fetch. And then if you come back here, we have, like, this is actually gonna fetch all this data for us. So if I do console log, and then I do preloaded query, and then the server is running, my app is here, ignore the errors, but what I want you to see is on the server side, it actually runs the query. It has a cache ID. It kind of does what a relay needs. It has prepared, the server has prepared everything that it needs to inject to your client side. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this data we have, preloaded query, and pass it down to our client side. Now here I need to tell it like what we're actually expecting. So preloaded query, relay already has this helper utility function for you to figure out what the types it needs. So you can do enhanced post feed query, and then I think that should be it. So I can fetch this one, right? Now we just call our utility function from before, use serializable preloaded query, because we already serialized it as a cache object for the relay on the server. We want to load that up on the client side. So we're gonna just pass this over. But then if you look at the types, it actually needs two arguments. It needs the environment and the query that we're fetching. So for the environment, you can do get environment. So I have the environment, so it kind of tells it, hey, I want you to use this certain fetch function, feed that down, and then we're gonna load up this query. Let's see why the types are being messed up again. Oh, because I used the wrong input types here. So the right ones are, I have a utility function for the preloaded types. And then we're gonna do this one. Assuming everything worked. Oh, I guess let me mute it. So in theory, now if I console log this thing, ignoring the error messages, if I do go to console, you can actually see the relay object that we had on the server side, which I stopped logging, but I will log it again. So the same object that we had, so it has all this information. It's loading it on the client side, but with all the stuff relay needs on the client side, because there are certain things, but all that is kind of abstracted away. And abstracted away with our utility functions. And if we go through all of this, we can do a query ref. So we're just giving it a reference to this function to use here. So I'm passing it down to our actual component that needs this. And then you can do query ref. It's not an any type. GitHub Copilot coming in. Query ref. I will go cheat on my types again. Yeah, so here I used my preloaded query. So use preloaded query, you tell it that, hey, this is my preloaded query to use. And then I think I broke. Okay, so this is legal Java TypeScript. And then hopefully, if we go back, not this one, docs we can close, database we can close. Okay, so you can see the testing query we uploaded 13 minutes ago shows up on our page. Very cool. Now we need a way to actually write something out, post it. Right now it's not working. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna go into our create post component, and we're simply gonna do given you have the relay environment set up, you can just use the hooks now and just easily do things. So we're gonna do use mutation, and then we're gonna do GraphQL. So you import this tagged type. It helps the relay compiler to look at, hey, these are the types I need to go through and generate an operations for. And then we're gonna do this thing. I'm even gonna make this simpler further. So we're gonna say $text is a string, because that's all we need. And then we're gonna do input. And let's fetch the IDs. Let me paste this in my graphical. Okay, I see what I broke. So I'm gonna paste this one here. So we're gonna do create post mutation, and then for the input type, so what we're gonna say is we want the text, and then we passed down the text to the query, and then this gives you a function that you can call to actually commit that mutation, or how you would actually just calling that function to actually call the mutation. And if I do npm run relay, it created another file for us which abstracts away all the actual operation that the client side would send. And then we would come down here. I have this handle submit function, so it kind of does a simple validation thing. If everything looks good, which I think does here, we can call our commit function, it is actually type safe. So I can press variables and it should be able to take our text, and then we can give it a content. I'm gonna trim the content. I think it works. So it has a callback here. Let me see if the callback is so on completed. It can actually give you something. It can actually give you the response. So we're gonna look at what we get back. So if I go here, reload my page, I have the GraphQL network inspector open. We're gonna say test. Oh, it didn't post anything. So let's look into why the submit isn't working. Oh, it actually called it a couple seconds later, but you can see we called the mutation, but you don't see anything updating on the page. But if I reload my page, we should see two of the creates, the tests I did. Now, in an ideal world, let's say we did this, right? You don't want the text to stay there. So what we're gonna do is, if I go back here, you can actually see it created this and we got an ID back. That's exactly what we requested for. So we're gonna just say set content. We know the query actually succeeded. Set the content to null. So now please clear. So if I now post it, it actually clears it. And if I reload, you're gonna see my please clear query. Now you may be wondering, like, the great UI here would be as I type, you want to see the post right away. You should be the first person to see it. We don't want to reload our page. So what Relay does, it has this idea of appending edges to your list. So you can actually, whatever we create here, you can append it to the main list. And there are docs, I can link you up here. Append, yeah. So they have a built-in function called append edge. So what it needs is it needs to have the edge type of what entity we're inserting in, and it needs to know where we are inserting this. So we're gonna make a little bit of change to this mutation, just so I don't break everything I have. I'm gonna copy one I created. It's gonna be the same thing. And so everything remains the same as before. Well, we added a new thing. It's called connections. Now, what we're saying is, as we create something, I want you to prepend. So it's gonna be the first one, not the last one, because append would be on the back. So, and we're you want to know, because once you're inserting, you want to have the same data that the feed needs. So we can use the same fragment that our postcards have, and it's actually gonna just hopefully work. So what exactly the connection means, like where do we get those? So if you go to the parent of this one, so create a post, enhanced post feed. Here you see I have this connection. So this thing tells Relay on how to, it gives it a key of a name of how to store it. We basically need to tell the child of that, hey, we're actually passing this connection ID. So this underscore ID didn't exist in our schema. So if I go to schema.graphql and we look into our timeline, post connection, there's no there's no underscore ID within that. But this is something Relay adds on the client side because that's what the Relay store does for you. So it has this key with certain things it appends to this key, and we're gonna give this connection ID down to the create post. So it's just a string that you get back, and then all we need to do here is we're gonna tell it that, hey, this is my connection. I didn't run my compiler, so I'm gonna compile it again, And hopefully this time, let's open this file. Now we can see it actually has the types that it's a string. So now if I reload, please show up, and it does. So relay magically adds that. So it actually did an optimistic update for you right there. We had all this information within what we were sending to the server. So it added that to your UI, and then on the side it actually up rolls that update. In case we had an error back, what you would see on the UI is it actually reverts this thing. So the post actually would go away. It won't show up. Any questions on like doing this so far? Yeah.
If you want to use the append edge and prepend edge stuff,
Yeah.
do you need to have like explicit like node edge stuff in your schema?
Yes. So that's a great question. So I'll go back to the schema design. So if we go to schema.graphql, if you notice that any paginated query, we use this connection. So this is where like the relay has this whole pagination spec, which defines for anything that it gives a consistent consistent schema to all your entities on how you're fetching the data. So if you look into page info, page info, type page info. So that one actually tells you that do I have the next page, do I have the previous, and all the cursors, which is useful if you were to do like a, infinite loading kind of thing. And then you define the edges. So what edge has the cursor to that certain entity, and the node of that is our actual post type. So anytime you're doing relay, you have this certain spec you should be following, then the relay client knows how to handle this thing. We already had this server kind of set up with connection and edges, so that is why it works. And then if you go into the actual create post payload, we actually return the same edge type from here, part of the payload. So once it knows it has that edge, it can just easily prepend or append it back. Does that answer? Awesome. So yeah, so we have, it's loading everything up. Let's go back to my slides for a second. So now another thing is, well, right now it's just like me doing on my app, so you can't really see the value of a data loader here, but essentially what is going on is like for each of these queries, you're fetching the author information separately, because on our, if you look at our, the schema for the database, on the database, the author ID is associated to a table. So either you would be doing a join, or maybe you have a different author service because maybe some other team manages that, and you would be populating author with like different types of fields. And then if I go to GraphQL file, so type user, type user. Okay. Yeah. So if you look at the type user, it doesn't just have name, username, it also has like a bio and like all the followers. So you can actually, there's a lot more things. It's not a one-to-one mapping to your schema, your database schema. It's much more than that. And that is where like you want loader functions to come in handy with you. So we want to fetch all the different users, but what this function would do is when we call this thing is you can have, right now this is all user IDs 1 essentially. You don't want to do like a query that does 1 each time for each query you're fetching. You want to actually batch them up into one thing. So that's exactly what this data loader does. It's able to batch all these operations into one, so it deduplicates user ID 1 into just one, and then once it gets back to your resolver, so let's say where I call it user by ID. So for example, in my post, user by ID. So if you're calling the author, like it looks up the author by an it looks up the post by an ID, and then it actually fetches all those authors, but it's able to actually deduplicate and batch stuff for you. And I think I have a slide that shows that part pretty well. So let me share my screen. So going back to the slides. Yeah, so this is what I was trying to explain. I think the visual does a better job than I did. So essentially you have, let's say, a user you're selecting on ID 1. You're trying to get all their friends. So maybe there's like 3 different IDs, and then underneath you're fetching a best friend for each of them. So it's kind of like a graph you're traversing through, and you don't really want to have this query running in your production, because you're gonna, if you're using Postgres, you probably will run out of connections, and it's gonna be a bad thing, and the reads are gonna be very heavy. Where data loader comes in is it's actually able to, given these were kind of unique in some sense, it actually deduplicates everything. So you have 2, 3, 4 as the friend, and it fetches all that information up front and it preloads it. I linked a blog post from Mark Andre. He does a really great job at explaining data loader than I did. So check him out. So yeah, we looked at our stuff, and then I think, yeah, we already did this part. We added a relay to our setup. We loaded the whole page. We talked about the serializable query on the server side and how to use that serialized query on the client side. React server components. Now let's talk about why even React server components matter. So let's look at this waterfall. Your request comes in, and we were doing 3 round trips to render a page. We cut that down into just one request by optimizing it for our backend. So our front end was sending one request. So let's say you have more queries that you're doing. You could take this thing, you can, as your app grows, maybe you have 10 different things you're fetching. That kind of would slow down. And the other thing that we learned is manually you don't want to keep track of anything, because if someone new joins your team, you're kind of breaking everything up on day 1. So you don't want that to be happening. So from user experience point, you don't want to wait forever, because you don't want to have this chain of requests going on. And then from a developer experience perspective, you want it to be very easy to actually maintain all this code without, you don't want it to be brittle. And you want, what we're trying to optimize for is, we want a good UX, we want cheap maintenance and fast performance. That's how Relay team Dan Abramov explains it on the RSC talk. I linked the talk if you guys want to watch that, if you haven't already. So the problem we have is a waterfall pattern. And even if you have this one, the idea Relay had is we can compile everything into one single query and run that. The problem you run into is, if your client is in a very spotty internet area, you have the page loaded, but you can't really see anything. It takes them a couple seconds to actually go to the server and get back the data. It just slows down in the real world, and it's not really ideal. It maybe works for over here, but maybe if I'm on my mobile data, it might not be the best experience. So we take it a step further. What if we could offload everything to the server? So the client initiates the request, you start rendering the data, and then boom, everything is done. The idea is you're just downloading the code, and the code already has everything for you. So you're not really initiating a new request to get the data. You may be thinking this is server-side rendering, and we have been doing that for a long time, but it's actually not really server-side rendering. If you break down server-side rendering, the way that works is you fetch the JavaScript, HTML, and everything that you need. Your browser loads that thing, and then browser runs that JavaScript to actually make the fetch call. Usually part of the payload that you get back if you're using server-side rendering is you're going to get a JSON object back, which is given which is injected within your app, and then when the JavaScript runs on the client, the React would actually load it up. I think I have a better example. So yeah, so browser, you download the HTML, you download everything, the JavaScript runs, React hydrates the content. So, and then React renders the content. So hydration, so essentially in server-side rendering, all you got is like chunks of different JavaScript files that you compile together on the client. So if you have like not a really great phone, like a Moto 3G from, I don't know, 2010, it will slow down. And the idea is, what if we could, offload even all the processing back to the server? Like, our servers are great, like why not just put it back? And that's really where React server components come in. You're shipping a pre-rendered component. So we let the server generate what React would do on the client side on the server. And when the payload comes in, they have like a certain JSON binary format that it comes in. But then when the React runtime see this payload, it renders the component right away. There's no like waiting for like, running the JavaScript, iterating over anything. So it's straight from the RSC for React Server Components. Like, does it replace SSR? No, it doesn't. They both are different types of ways. They're both different techniques, and they explain it really well on why. So going back to our UI, let me share my screen. Any questions on that one? Sweet. Change to entire screen. Okay. So now we're gonna talk about a little bit about optimistic UIs. So let's say you want to actually like this thing. Right now I'm pressing my button, but it doesn't do anything. So let's look into how we would make it like something. Oh yeah, we already, the way we set up the server component, I think I didn't mention it before, but the way we actually set up this, load serializable query and use serializable query, we actually don't make any request to the backend. Like, virtually there's no other request going on. Like, this one gets the data, and that is all what we're rendering. Like, this page component is what Next.js gives me, and it has everything that we need. So there's no GraphQL request going on. Like, all the data is already pre-rendered for you, that we already have React server components working. What we want to make work next is, we want in the postcard this like button to actually do something for us. I think this is the simplest one, hopefully. So we have this function already, and what we'll do, all you're doing here is, we're gonna do a use mutation. Let me just copy paste my other one, postcard. So running relay, we create this new mutation to actually fetch something. This is for debugging if you want to see what the response was coming back, but we don't need anything. We'll just keep it for now. And then the two things we're getting now is, we want to know what the like count is and was it liked by me or not, because those are the only two things if you think when the state updates change. Everything else, comment this one out. Hopefully the page is fixed. I broke it a little bit more. It says line 41. Okay. So till this part works, and then I think here. Okay. So this part works. So what you want to be able to do is you take commit, like I already have this function, so I'm gonna just uncomment everything in this one. So we're giving the ID of the post I want to like, because we already have that from the parent, because the postcard knows which post it is. Ignore the optimistic response. We're gonna comment that one out. And once we like something, it should show the post was, well, the copy is wrong, but you can see it's actually liking stuff. So that is where the, so we didn't have to do anything special other than we just fetched the two things that we need and everything else just gets updated. So that's the beauty of using Relay is once you set it up, adding these features gets much more simpler. Like you get optimistic updates right out of the box. And then we just have to do a similar thing for unlikes. So if I go back here, add a comment unlike, run relay. I think I broke it again. And then if everything works, I should be able to unlike or like it back. Oh, the copy is wrong, but we'll just say post liked. Okay. Yeah, that works. So you can see, we can add things to the list. We can like everything as a like it's updating in real time for on the client side, but even if something rollbacks, it's actually gonna just fix it by itself. So that's all I have. Any questions?
There are some errors in the left corner. Are they like hydration or is it something related to it?
It's because I'm not passing a ID field. Maybe if I reload, it fixes it. But I did pass an ID field. Okay.
Oh, and it did work.
It did work, but I think I'm just trying to see where I missed something. Okay, it's gone. I just had a bad variable here. It should be data.id, not underscore ID, and it was a reference error,
Okay.
not a relay error.
Right.
Anything else?
I have another one.
Yeah.
Facebook is using Relay.
Yeah.
And the way I use Relay usually was for like big products that needed to be done well and also had a big budget. Relay is kind of like for high fidelity software development from what I understand. So how does it apply to AI? Let me rephrase. So people do a lot of low fidelity software development nowadays. Do you feel Relay can also be used for vibe coders and smaller teams that don't have the budget or the capacity to even read its docs because docs are too long? Or would they better stick to some simpler clients?
So I think, I mean, the question comes down to will, vibe coding teams actually use GraphQL at first place, right? Like, if you look at the most vibe coded apps, like I don't see GraphQL used there today, right? So if they're using GraphQL, like the argument I can make is GraphQL already has the foreign stream built into it now, or what it's in some stages, and Relay Client supports these things. And then if you're thinking, let's say ChatGPT like UI, we already have all these pieces figured out. So I don't like, to me it just feels like it's a right fit, because you can compile, like, you can combine all the existing good practices we have and just notch it up 10 times or 100 times with this thing. So I think they will use it, but it depends. Because I know most of the data online is like Relay lacks the actual implementation examples, and all the AI needs is like good implementations. Anyone else? Yes.
I guess how do you feel kind of subscriptions fit into kind of the Relay model and kind of what you've built in, like here? I know you've not given an example today, but
Yeah. So Relay actually has a whole subscription thing. So Relay, if I go to the docs, they do have like a use subscription hook. It would work very similar to how we did the use query to fetch the data. So usually, like the way subscriptions would work is you have the fragment, and then and you're just on that fragment you're telling, like, let's say we had for our UI, if I go back, you had this subscription for listening to the posts. All you would do is use subscription and spread the post fragment. Everything else would work. Like it would append it essentially with like some annotations. Anyone else? I guess we're good. Thank you so much for listening.